Today, we're going to talk about an experienced diver who went missing under some strange circumstances. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you've come to the right place. Be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. Let's get started. In the year 2010, Ben McDaniel was really having an incredibly hard time. He had endured a failed marriage, and on top of that, a bankrupted construction company. But even worse, he had incurred a hefty tax debt, somewhere along the lines of $50,000. So McDaniel decided to return home to his parents' house in Memphis. Ben's parents would actually offer him their beach house in Santa Rosa Beach, Florida. They figured he could use some time to collect himself and get back on his feet, while also just taking some time to enjoy the weather. And the move actually proved to be beneficial for Ben. His parents noted that he started getting back to normal, and he started to rediscover his boyhood passion of scuba diving. And one of his favorite places to dive at was Vortex Springs in Florida. This was about an hour away from his beach house. So Vortex Springs is one of Florida's largest freshwater diving facilities, and it's known as the Mecca of dive training. And Vortex also offers cavern and cave diving for experienced and licensed divers. Of course, there's tons of fish and wildlife in there, but also it's crystal clear, beautiful water, which makes diving that much better. And Vortex Springs produces 28 million gallons of crystal clear water daily, and the year-round temperature of this water is about 68 degrees. So you can see from pictures, this vortex is amazing. It is this huge, round, blue, crystal clear water, and the further down you go, obviously the more amazing the structure is. But approximately 115 feet below the surface, divers are gonna encounter a gate. And next to the gate is a sign warning divers. Basically says, stop, prevent your death, don't go any further. But if you are a licensed diver, you can actually get the key from the shop to unlock the gate and go into these caves. And the cave had a reputation of being extremely treacherous. The state actually debated banning diving into this cave in 1990 because of 13 recorded deaths. So this cave is not for beginners. It is for very experienced divers, and even then, you're going in at your own risk. So in response to all of these deaths, obviously the gate goes up and the shop puts up signs saying, hey, don't go any further. There's nothing in this cave worth dying for. And then, of course, they have that gate. Obviously should be a deterrent to many people. If you see a gate blocked with heavy chains blocking off someplace, you'd probably want to stay out of it for a reason. So Ben McDaniels was not a certified diver yet, but he had a lot of dive experience. And he actually kept a logbook of all his dives. So on August 18, 2010, it's a typical hot Florida summer day. So Ben McDaniels makes the hour drive to the Vortex Springs, and he's gonna be there all day, which is not uncommon for the 30-year-old. And that day, he would do 3 dives into the Vortex Springs. He completed 2 dives within the morning and early afternoon, and after resurfacing from the second dive, he would go and refill his tanks. And divers noted that he spent most of his afternoon alongside the water, testing equipment, making notes in his logbook, and possibly waiting for Vortex Springs to close. And although Vortex Springs closed around 5 or 6 in the evening every night, divers that were licensed were allowed to dive beyond that time. And there's kind of a theory that Ben was waiting for everybody to go home so that he could dive to the gate, break open the lock, and dive beyond that. Because again, he was not a licensed diver, so he wouldn't be able to get the key from the shop and go on with his exploration. It's around 7:30 p.m. when Ben suits up and he's getting ready to go into the water to complete another dive. At around 6:30, he had called his mother to chat with her, and then after that, he left a voicemail for a friend, sounding super excited for his big 3rd dive. And then at around 7:30, he suited up and he jumped into the water. So he gets down 115 feet deep into this water, and he gets to the gate. But what Ben didn't realize is he actually wasn't alone in the water. Endorado and Chuck were 2 employees at the Vortex Springs, were actually completing their dive. They like to do a weekly dive to relax and enjoy themselves. And on their way out, they came across Ben, who was tampering with the lock on the gate. And I want to note that, again, this is an extremely dangerous area. At least 13 people had died from going beyond that gated section, and he was not certified. So the 2 friends that worked at the Vortex, they came came to the top of the surface, and one of them realized that it was probably much safer for him to go unlock the gate instead of having Ben sit there and tamper with it and try to break into it. He assumed one way or another he was going to break in and go into the cave anyways. So Endorado decided to go back down and unlock the gate for Ben. And he worried that Ben would overexert himself tampering with the lock, and he didn't have a dive buddy and he could get stuck down there. So he just felt that it was the safest option to unlock it for Ben. And they suspected that Ben had been tampering with this gate prior to the day he went missing. So after opening the gates, obviously the two friends leave him to go on his dive. So the two friends swam to the top, they took off all their gear and went and grabbed a coffee. And typically Endorado felt he needed to stay behind and kind of watch divers, look for bubbles and things like that. But the owner was staying late that evening, so he felt comfortable that he didn't need to be there. And he had plans with Chuck, so he felt it was fine to leave him there and he would be totally fine diving by himself. So on August 19th, Endorado comes back to work at around 10 a.m. and he notes that Ben's truck is still in the parking lot. But he wasn't entirely alarmed because Ben did come early and it wasn't unlike him to be there early and get a head start diving. And in the 4 months prior to this disappearance, Ben entered over 250 dives into his logbook. He was really quite an experienced diver, even though he wasn't licensed. And he became relatively known at the Vortex Springs. He was there a lot. So his truck being there in the parking lot really didn't set off any alarm bells. Then the next day, August 20th, Endorado arrives to work at 10 a.m. It's a Friday morning, and he notices that Ben's truck is still in the parking lot, and it's in the same spot. So he becomes alarmed, he gets worried, he starts asking other employees if they had seen Ben since Thursday, and when it became clear that nobody had seen him since that last dive on Wednesday, he phoned for the police. So waiting for the police to arrive, he suits up, he goes and jumps in the water and goes to look for Ben. And if he were to find a diver's body, he would tie a rope to the spot to make sure that the recovery divers could spot him. And obviously the police arrive, they're waiting for him to get out of the water. Another diver emerges and said that the gate was actually open and that nobody had seen Ben. So local certified divers were called in to do some search and rescue and maybe even recovery. So when you move beyond that locked gate, it is incredibly claustrophobic and hard to work through. Even experienced divers have some serious trouble working through this cave. It's a really tight and cramped area to try to navigate through, and you're underwater and it's dark. It makes me claustrophobic just thinking about it. In some places in the cave, you'd actually have to remove your tank and kind of push it through certain spots to get through it because that's how tight it is. And some of the tightest spots in there even require divers to turn their head as they're going through. That is not a place I would ever want to be. And when reading Ben McDaniel's logbooks, people began to realize that he was actually mapping out the cave. And he had actually made at least one dive to the furthest reaches of the cave. So he had actually gotten beyond that gate prior to his disappearance. And he was probably diving in places that experienced divers hadn't actually been in yet. And the initial search into his disappearance really turned up nothing. Obviously, they searched his truck where they found his cell phone, $700 in cash, and some personal items, but they were still there. They hadn't been stolen, they hadn't been tampered with to anybody's knowledge. So for the next 3 days, volunteer divers would scour this area. And the only evidence that anyone has found were 2 decompression tanks discovered at the cave's entrance. And after 36 days of exhaustive searching, there were no results. The family offered quite a sizable reward until one diver searching for clues of Ben McDaniel's disappearance became trapped and died in the cave, which made everybody upset. And the diving community was like, hey, this reward is too much of a temptation. It's going to put people's lives at risk as it already has. So the reward was rescinded. So obviously there are a lot of theories about what happened to Ben on his dive into that cave. Jill Hayner was contacted by Ben's parents, and Jill is considered the very best female diver in the world and makes a lot of underwater documentaries. During their dive looking for evidence that Ben was there, they found a fold-up shovel in the cave. They were hopeful it was Ben's, but it turned out that it wasn't. Other than the tanks being found, there was no other evidence that Ben actually ever made it into the cave beyond that gate and those restricted tight areas. So divers began to search for any sign of decomposition in the water. Obviously, if he had gotten stuck, there might be some sign of that. Maybe the wildlife would obviously eat the body after a while, but wildlife divers apparently found zero evidence of wildlife scavenging a body. Tests were done to the water to look for bacteria from decomposition and found nothing. So there are a few theories. Did he actually make it into the cave? Were those tanks with his name on it a red herring? And if Ben made it into the cave, did he get stuck and eventually drown? But there are also some theories about foul play. So we have the employee that went down and unlocked the gate for Ben, even though Ben wasn't a certified and licensed diver, which is a serious issue. Why would he go and unlock a gate for somebody that was not allowed in that area, who also did not have a diving buddy? It does seem a little bit suspicious. Apparently, the owner of Vortex Springs was actually awaiting trial at the time of Ben's disappearance. He was awaiting trial for the attempted kidnapping and beating of a former employee. The owner would eventually plead no contest and only received a fine and probation. The man is since deceased, but with suspicious circumstances surrounding his death. Some believe that Ben may have faked his own death in order to escape this heavy financial burden, but to me, that doesn't seem likely. So many people believe that after he got beyond the gate, he obviously went searching and may have gotten stuck and drowned, which is the most likely case. But you really can't rule out those other theories because everything about this case just doesn't sit right. The employee letting an uncertified diver go through the gate because he thought it would be a better idea than having him fidget and fuss around with the gate lock. The fact that the owner of the Vortex was already in some serious legal trouble. But really, none of this just sits right. And Ben's parents are still looking for answers all these years later. But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. See you next time.